The idea of a Christmas truce, proposed by Ukraine and its European partners, was almost immediately rejected in Moscow. At the same time, Kremlin spokesman Peskov cynically stated that what they need is a full-fledged peace agreement, not short-term pauses. And such a reaction was entirely predictable. During the full-scale invasion, Putin was repeatedly offered a ceasefire, both at Easter and during the New Year holidays. But every time, the Russians either officially refused to do so or, as happened in January 2023, continued the shelling, which is why the truce was declared formally invalid. This week, several key international players proposed a ceasefire initiative. First, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan suggested to Moscow that they at least refrain from striking Ukraine's critical infrastructure and ports. Then German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, he expressed hope that, I quote, the remnants of humanity would not allow the Russians to continue striking civilians during the holidays. He proposed a complete ceasefire for the Christmas and New Year holidays. This initiative was immediately supported by Kyiv and Washington. We
now have a chance for a genuine peace process. For the first time since February 24th, 2022, there's a chance for a real peace process for Ukraine. This plant is very delicate, but the chance for a peace process is real. Over the past few weeks, we have been working to prepare the ground for a ceasefire in Ukraine. We all know the cost of this war. Now it's time to talk about the cost of peace. This includes questions of security guarantees, territories, and an effective mechanism to monitor the ceasefire.
At the same time, the Kremlin is convinced that any ceasefire undermines their key strategy: constant military pressure and blackmail by force. Putin sees any pause not as a humanitarian step, but as an admission that the war can be stopped on terms other than his own. Analysts at the Institute for the Study of War are convinced that after rejecting a holiday truce, it logically follows that any security guarantees for Ukraine will also be refused.
The Kremlin has consistently stated that it will reject any peace agreements offering reliable security guarantees for Ukraine, and it is extremely unlikely that it will accept agreements containing any provisions guaranteeing Ukraine's territorial integrity. Russia will use political and military means to achieve its stated goal of capturing all of Ukraine. And that is why Moscow is unlikely to accept any peace agreement or security guarantees that do not ensure Russia's complete control over Ukraine in the medium and long term. From the report of the Institute of War.
After long, intense negotiations in Berlin, EU and US leaders pledged to provide Kyiv with reliable security guarantees that can protect the country from any invasion for decades to come. What exactly is written in the text of this document is still unknown. But according to the New York Times, citing its sources, one of the key objectives is to increase the size of Ukraine's armed forces to 800,000 in peacetime. It is also stated that European countries may be involved to ensure security in the air and maritime space. At the same time, the United States will take on the key role of control and deterrence.
The United States will use its extensive intelligence systems to help monitor the ceasefire and detect Russian activity. The Americans will also help verify Russia's compliance with the agreement and make sure that minor skirmishes between Russia and Ukraine do not escalate into a new war. The document also details how the United States will help identify attempts by Russia to stage false flag operations that could give Moscow a pretext to resume hostilities. From a publication by the New York Times.
It's absolutely clear that if there is no progress now, the Kremlin will, as usual, shift the blame onto European countries. Russian authorities have repeatedly claimed that the EU is allegedly stalling Donald Trump's peace initiatives and hindering a swift end to the war. After the talks in Berlin, the tone in the German press noticeably changed. More and more leading media outlets are writing that it's impossible to negotiate with Putin using the language of concessions. He only responds to tough policies, not diplomatic gestures.
Putin has so far rejected all amendments proposed by the Europeans, and in this situation, the EU needs to demonstrate its ability to act in order to avoid the impression that this union is irrelevant on the international stage. Putin wants to win on the terms that have remained unchanged since the beginning of the war. We know him well enough to understand that he only respects those who pursue policies as ruthlessly as he does. Only when the costs for Russia become significant will he be ready for serious negotiations. From a publication by Tagesspiegel.
The European Union is ready to increase pressure on the Kremlin with a new package of sanctions to force Russia to come to the negotiating table and achieve real results. This was stated by the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, during her speech in the European Parliament. She once again emphasized nothing about Ukraine should not be decided without Ukraine. She called the financial aid to Kyiv for the next 2 years the most important act of European defense. After all, right now, it is not only the fate of Ukraine that is being decided, but the fate of the entire continent.
The era of Europe's independence must be unstoppable, and we still have a lot of work ahead of us. We must go further, we must move quickly, and this is especially important when it comes to security and defense. The point is simple. Europe must take responsibility for its own security. This is no longer an option, it's a necessity.
After talks in Berlin, U.S. President Donald Trump stated that Ukraine is now closer to peace, closer than ever before. However, it's worth remembering how many times Putin has failed to meet these expectations. If that happens again this time, the White House should move to exert serious pressure on the Russian Federation. This statement was made by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, emphasizing that Kyiv is counting on both new arms deliveries and tougher economic sanctions against the aggressor. By the way, according to Bloomberg, the United States is already preparing such measures and may announce them by the end of this week.
The U.S. is preparing a new round of sanctions against the Russian energy sector to increase pressure on Moscow if Putin rejects a peace agreement with Ukraine. Various options are being considered, such as targeting ships from the so-called shadow fleet used to transport Russian oil, as well as traders facilitating these operations. From a Bloomberg agency report.
At the latest meeting of the Defense Ministry Board, Putin once again stated that Russia will not abandon its goals of seizing territories, and will achieve them, I quote, by diplomatic or military means. At the same time, the dictator began threatening to intensify the offensive in key directions and also threatened to put new forces on combat duty by the end of the year. The Oreshnik missile system. This rhetoric definitively confirms that for the Kremlin, talk of diplomacy is nothing but a cover for escalation and military blackmail.